things I need to change about our programs here is we need to make a public announcement about land acknowledgement in our country. And that is actually, why do we recognize the land? Well, that's a way to have an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on. And it's a way of honoring indigenous peoples who've lived and worked on this land from time immemorial. So it's important to understand the long-standing history that's brought you to reside on this land and to seek to understand your place within that history. Frankly, with the exception of a handful of people in this room, we're all settler colonists. And we forced these people off their land, and we caused lingering problems, which Dr. Coulter is going to talk about today. There's some different counts, and now I've got Cindy in the room, so I shouldn't say, but there's at least 19 or 22 tribes that historically resided within the boundaries of what we call Iowa. But if you look at the back side of this list, these are all the tribes that have resided here. I haven't given you this list, but I'm just showing you how extensive it is, that there's actually 573 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And so Gore Vidal talks about our national amnesia, and this is a very good example of it. We go through our day-to-day life basically oblivious to what's going on in Indian country. So I'm really glad you came here today to learn a little bit about some of the challenges they're facing, and I hope that in the future we continue to pause for a moment at the beginning of any of our public events and acknowledge those that came before us. Dr. Joe Coulter is Professor Emeritus in the College of Public Health and the Carver College of Medicine at the University of Iowa. Dr. Coulter is an enrolled member of the citizen Pottawattamie Nation of Oklahoma and currently active in teaching, research and scholarship, and community service in American Indian, Alaska, and Native Health. He's a member of the Iowa Commission on Native American Affairs and the Indian Advisory Council of the Office of the State Archaeologist. He also serves on the University of Iowa Native American Council and frankly helped spur or start the entire American Indian Studies program here at the University of Iowa. He's a fixture here in this community, or an institution. He has been really a key person in fostering many students through their experiences here at the University of Iowa, native and non-native. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Coulter today.
Well, thank you, thank you, Mary. That was very nice. It's probably the academic in me, but I've got a bunch of slides. And a lot of the slides you'll see, well, we'll have a gold, it'll be gold. This one is not, but it'll be gold and underlined. Those are hyperlinks. And you may be able to get from Mary a copy of this so that you can open the hyperlinks, and I think she has put a lot of the links on that sheet there. And what that is for is when I'm working with a class and students and so forth, that's the reading material. They don't have to buy textbooks or any of that kind of stuff. So the other thing is that I've just got way too many slides. And so I'll be going through these things fairly quickly. But if you have some points, and I would like to interact with you a little bit, I've posed some questions up here, and we can kind of talk with them. But if you want to see the whole thing, it's probably going to run more than an hour. So we better get started. These are some of the challenges in working in Indian country. As Mary mentioned, there's 573 tribes, federally recognized tribes. And that's a lot of people. There's a lot of cultural differences. Being Indian is just not a generic thing. Understanding the historical and contemporary environments. These are things, if you're going to work in Indian country, you've got to develop a cultural understanding. You need to understand the environmental and social issues. You know, a lot of the folks are living on reservations. Well, how did they end up with that land? Well, that was land nobody else wanted. at the time. Turns out there's some real resources on some of them, but those are issues. The Dakota Access Pipeline, which has the potential to pollute the Missouri and the groundwater for the tribes up there in northern South Dakota. Big deal. We're going to talk a good deal about health disparities in Indian country, and then the need for, if you're going to be working, to understand the governmental, the regulatory, and business and community aspects. Well, who's an Indian? Well, they're not noble savages. They're not drunken Indians. They're not savage Indians. They're not vanishing Indians. I always like this. I pride myself of being a hospitable Indian giver. No, I take that back. And of course the mascots. You all did hear that the Washington Redskins changed their name, didn't you? Yeah, the DC Redskins. You can see here how the federal government, this is the census, defines who's an Indian. It's American Indian or Alaskan Native. And then on this particular form, you put your tribe down there. Also, on here is a place where you can indicate that you're mixed. But it's American Indian and Alaskan Native, AIAN. And the population alone, when they've put down, they belong to a tribe and are supposedly full-bloods, is 0.9%. Now that's probably misleading because there's not that many full-bloods. And alone and in combination, they make up 1.7% of the population. Now, you may have remembered the recent thing, Elizabeth Warren, who had, a great-grandmother that was a Cherokee princess or something. That's the standard story. And went to, I think, 23andMe or one of the things and found that, yeah, she did have some Indian blood. But that's not what defines whether you're an Indian or not. This Harvard Law Review link it's a very good article to get into. Anybody recognize where this is? Yeah. And what's that flag?
Monument Valley.
Is located in what reservation? Navajo. Dene. Yeah. Here's where I'm from, and here's what my ID has. If you're a member of a federally recognized tribe, you will have, most tribes have an identification card, and you have a number. Mine originally, when we called ourselves the Citizen Band, Pottawattamie. But this is my new card that I just got a few weeks ago because my other plastic one got, so I couldn't read it. But this is where I am. It's my birthday when they issued the card here recently. And these are my the roles in which my relatives occur. And so And as you'll see over here, I'm just 1/16. I'm a quarter Irish. That's where the Coulter comes from. A quarter Danish, my Jensen grandparents from South Dakota. And then I'm also a quarter English, and then 3/16 French. That's where the Fracking comes from, and then 1/16 Pottawattamie Indian. So we're all mutts, or most of us are. Here's the locations of the major reservations and where the population is found. The reservation communities are circled in the orange there. You'll see here in Oklahoma, where I grew up and where our tribe is located over here in Shawnee, Oklahoma, in Pottawattamie County. And Iowa has a Pottawattamie County. Why is that? Anybody know?
Potawatomi's lived in southwest Iowa.
Yeah, but they were moved there from the
Yeah.
more like the northeastern part of Iowa.
Yeah, where my relatives came from was right up here by the St. Joseph River in northern Indiana. But you can see there's very few native people east of the Mississippi. Why is that?
Andrew Jackson.
Who's on, you keep quiet, Mary. Who's on the $20 bill? Yeah, it's Andrew Jackson, and he moved all those Indians west of the Mississippi, and so the Trail of Tears, the Cherokee, Seminole, and others, the so-called 5 civilized tribes, were all moved into Oklahoma. And an interesting thing, we're kind of talking about blood, is the Cherokee tribe actually had indentured slaves that moved with them to Oklahoma. About 3-4 years ago, those descendants of those slaves were enrolled in the Cherokee tribe, even though they didn't have any Cherokee blood. But it allowed those people to receive the benefits from members of federally recognized tribes, health care, educational monies, things like that. But yeah. Here's actually a little clear map of the reservations, which are in green, and you'll notice that while there's all this purple area here in Oklahoma, there's only one, quote, reservation. It's the Osage Reservation. And what it is, it's the mineral rights. It's only the mineral rights that the tribe owns in that area. All of us were originally when Oklahoma was turned into a state around the turn of the century, became a state in 1907, I think. All the Indians, the 35 or so tribes that were down there, were all their land, the territory, were allotted. So you got a quarter section of land. What is it, 160 acres or 100? I think it's 160 acres. And then it was taken out of trust with the federal government and no longer considered a reservation. You're a private owner. And we still have my grandmother's allotment down in a little town called Wanette, Oklahoma, which is in Pottawattamie County. But some of these that are kind of in the pink are state recognized tribes. Like over here in North Carolina, these are the Lumbee. There's a very large number of Lumbee, and they have been seeking federal recognition for many, many years, but it still hasn't happened. Part of it is difficulties with establishing their linguistic background, but I won't get into that. So we're going to kind of talk about today the Iowa, but I have included kind of a broader picture because all these tribes that Mary mentioned that had somehow had a connection to Iowa are still out there. All the Ojibwe, which are up here, and they do with a little pointer. The Chippewas or Ojibwe up here, who didn't get removed. They were at one time here. The Pottawattamie here, there's a few of the Pokagon band, which is now federally recognized. But many of the Pottawattamie were around the southern end of Lake Michigan. Does anybody know what the name Chicago means? It's a
corruption of the word Chicago, which is skunk in the Algonquin.
Yeah, in the Algonquin language. It's the stinking place. It's really because where the Chicago, what's called the Chicago River, comes into Lake Michigan, was originally all wild onions. Chicagos is onions. Chicago skunk. Chicagos is onions. But I always, especially if there's some Chicago people in the audience. Then out here we have the Dakota, or one of the woodland Sioux, and then the Lakota, which are located out here in Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, and so forth. As you can see in this little clearer picture, you can see the variety of tribes that are down here in Oklahoma. They include Sac and Fox, which also have a little reservation up here in northeastern Kansas, and they're all actually related to the Meskwaki, who are the Sac. Their official name is the Sac and Fox of the Mississippi in Iowa, but they call themselves Meskwaki. The word in the Pottawattamie language for our tribe is Nishnabé. In Chippewa or Algonquin language, it's Anishinaabe, but we have a lot more consonants in the Pottawattamie language. But it just means the people. That's a capital T and a capital P. Of course, what's Iowa named after? The Iowa tribe. And here's a link up here so you can go to their website and learn a lot about, and that's why these links are useful. Virtually all federally recognized tribes do have a website and the brief history and all kinds of useful things. And I just spent most of yesterday with Lance Foster, who is Iowa and who serves on the Indian Advisory Commission to the committee or council to the Office of the State Archaeologist. Very active. He's authored a number of books and is quite the artist. Here's links to the 4 tribes that actually have trust land in Iowa. Of course, the Meskwaki are the only tribe that is located here. These others have trust land in the state of Iowa, mostly for their casinos. So they include the Winnebago, also sometimes known as the Ho-Chunk, and then also the Omaha, and then the Ponca Tribe, which was actually disenfranchised, bought out by the federal government. The Indian Termination Act allowed tribes to dissolve their federal recognition and in return for, thousands, $1 million payments. But after a few of them did that and suffered the loss of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service and things like that, the Ponca were re-recognized, and they're pretty dispersed. But they have a little casino down in southern Nebraska, or kind of outside Omaha.
It's Carter Lake, Iowa.
Huh?
Carter Lake, Iowa, technically.
Yeah, that's where. Anyway, and as I will always emphasize, the cultural understanding is unique to the individual tribes. You really, in order to understand them, have to understand where they really came from, their language and traditions, the effects of, colonialism and invasion, genocide, removal to reservations, the Indian Wars, effects of missionaries, forced assimilation. That's where we don't have a single living native Pottawattamie native speaker anymore. They're gone. The people there were relocated from an earlier reservation out in Kansas when they were allotted, and then once they got titles to the land, they were in debt to the traders and turned the titles over to the traders, so they were all brought down to Oklahoma. They were also given citizenship when they did that, and that's why we're called the Citizen Band. But the Benedictines were the ones who helped move us to Oklahoma, and my dad's mother and we were all raised Catholic. But now the tribe has a very active language program going on, taking Indian names and things like that. And I was really tickled when I moved up here to Iowa to become acquainted with the Meskwakis, most of whom have more Pottawattamie blood than I do. But they have, unlike many of the people down in Oklahoma, have been able to maintain their language and their customs and their culture better than almost any of the Algonquin Great Lakes tribes, with maybe the exception of some of the northern Ojibwe. But I have learned and continue to learn a lot from my Meskwaki friends. Whoa. Well, I may need some. Okay. Yeah, these are pictures from the websites of the 4 tribes I mentioned, where you can learn about the Meskwaki history, Winnebago, Omaha, and Ponca, and those are very valuable. Also, what does the word or Des Moines mean? Huh? It's actually a corruption of French. The first French people who were coming up the Mississippi, when they got down to where the present-day Des Moines River goes into the Mississippi, there were native people there, and the French called them the people, which is Des Moines. Des Moines. It's kind of corrupted, but the Muscatine is actually Mascoutin, which means the prairie people. And you would just be amazed if you go through. I'm afraid this is probably out of print now, but the number of place names in Iowa are reflective of a lot of Native history. Here's Native Americans in Iowa. You can see that Sioux are the most prominent group, and I never used the word Sioux. Does anybody know where that word comes from? Look it up sometime in the dictionary. It comes from a word. It comes from a word, the word Nottoway Sioux. What does Nottoway mean? Big bad snakes. And Sioux is a diminutive. So that word Sioux means little bad snakes. And that name was acquired because of the Algonquin groups, the Chippewa, Ottawa, Pottawattamie, and so forth, had problems with the Iroquois and the eastern New York tribes, and they were known as the Nottoway. And then we had our equally strong disagreements with all the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, and that's where the term Sioux came from. And so I never use that term when I'm around any Lakota or Dakota people, because they know I know what that means. But just a little aside. Cherokee, Chippewa, and these are Alaskan Native. These are where most of the Native people are located. Woodbury County. What's that? What's there? Sioux City. Yeah, that has the largest Native population, and most of them are Dakota and Lakota folks that are there. But it's right across the river from Winnebago, or Ho-Chunk, and the Omaha. And there is an Indian Health Service hospital, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Well, let's get into health disparities, which are pretty serious in Indian country. Include unintentional injuries or accidents. It's the leading cause of death. Maternal and child health is an issue. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people under the age of 40-something. And then, of course, alcohol and substance abuse. And in lots of these pictures you'll see, you get, I put them up there intentionally, and you're to look at them closely. Look at the ankles. These are some other problems. This is what it's like to live on Pine Ridge, old trailer house. That's a tent back there, and this is a windbreak. Old cars, junk. This is Whiteclay. We'll get into more about that. You know where what Whiteclay is? It's Whiteclay, Nebraska. Just keep in mind. Let's see. And violence against Native women. It's a big issue, but we now have some national legislation which is trying to deal with that. Here's some stuff from the Trends in Indian Health, which is the most recent data we really have. So it goes back to 2004. This is you can see the rate at which people pass away is like, for the age of under 5 for Native people, is 3 times what it is for U.S. all races, and again, more than twice between ages of 5 and 24, and still almost 3 times higher for age 25, and then here 45, and of course once you get up to 65, most people are dead. So. Well, what's going on? Well, it's, as I mentioned, it's unintentional injuries, accidents. A lot of them are car accidents, especially in reservation communities. Very poor roads, very poor road maintenance, and failure to buckle the kids up to have good, modern, safe transportation. Drownings are often an issue. And then, of course, substance abuse, drugs, and alcohol, which again affect driving as well as putting people at risk. So the unintentional injuries up here, this is the rate, which is very large. And what they mean here by the adjusted is that when you're born, your race is put on your birth certificate. And it's usually not a matter of guessing. The mother or the parents indicate the race of the individual. But when the mortician or the whoever, when you die, that race is more likely to be put as white. And that was so prominent that major studies were done to find out how much misreporting of race, especially of American Indian people, was occurring on death certificates. And there's a factor used then to adjust for that. And so the more accurate data here is actually the heavier blue line. That's the adjusted rate. And you can see for that. And then we're talking ages 1 to 4 here. 1 to 4. Very young. Homicide? If we get up to 15 to 24 years, we still have unintentional injuries or accidents as the leading cause of death. But here we have suicide. Big problem. And homicides. Suicide's a big issue. This is the rate for males. This is age across here, and you can see that the risk of suicide for American Indians, Alaskan Natives tends to peak around 25 to 35, but still is pretty strong all the way out. Well, what's going on here? We get 25 to 44 years, still got accidents, but now what's this? Alcohol? Yeah. And here's what I'm talking about, Whiteclay, Nebraska. This guy's trying to stop people from coming into Whiteclay. And Whiteclay is just in Nebraska over the southern boundary of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And look how many people sell an average of 13,000 cans of beer and malt liquor a day. A day. Because you can't buy it on the reservation. But I have relatives up in Rapid City, and sometimes would go up through Pine Ridge, but I always avoided going on the road between Pine Ridge, the town of Pine Ridge, and Whiteclay. But things have changed. Finally, after the Indian community, especially some of the Winnebago who are located in Nebraska, were able to finally shut down the dealers in Whiteclay. But unfortunately, now these guys are waiting for a ride down to Rushville, further down, to get their alcohol. So it continues to be a problem, but it's not as bad as it was. Here's causes of death. Again, the blue is the adjusted, and black is all races. We're looking here, and this starts to take off of the meth problem. Here, and then this, and especially where it really starts to take off, that's the opioid epidemic that we're experiencing now. So it's a problem for everybody, but especially for Native folks. Okay, well, now see if you can get this. What would you think? This refers to counties, but think of what's the richest town or in the country?
Orange County.
Orange County. Anybody else want to?
Hanford, Connecticut?
Yeah. Any other?
San Francisco. Oh, county.
Then I'll ask you what the poorest county is. And this is 2011, but this really hadn't changed. It's Fairfax County, Virginia, which is right here. This is Washington, D.C. These are all the wealthy senators and lobbyists out here, you know, swimming pool, tennis courts. I had to cut the stables out of the picture. But yeah, oh yeah, they get all dressed up in their red coats, and it's quite the deal. And notice life expectancy is 83 years. The median income now is well over $100,000. Okay, what's the poorest county? The poorest place? Huh?
Pine Ridge.
Well, some years it is. This particular year, it's Zybok County, where the Cheyenne River Sioux are. And these are old HUD houses, you know, trailer, old vehicles. Notice life expectancy, 50 years as compared to 80s. The median income is approximately 1/10 of what the richest county is. And unemployment is like 90%, especially during the winter. There's a lot of other environmental issues. Fracking up in, especially in Montana, which is right next to North Dakota and Williston, where kind of the center of the Bakken shale stuff. And it's a big problem there because, you know, what happens is that they will get permission from the landowner of the tribe to come in and do the fracking, and so there's not much of a mess there, but you know, they're injecting this special water that has the fracking sand, which they get from Iowa, and that potentially pollutes the groundwater. But the main problem, health problem, is actually unintended pregnancy, violence against women, and what it is all these people who are truck drivers hauling the fracking sand and working on the drilling and stuff. They have no place to live. They go down, you know, and they're making, you know, sometimes $40-50 an hour, and there's no place. They go, you know, they'll drive their pickup truck and have a camper or something on the back or something, and after work go down to the bar and get drunk and assault the local women. And it's, yeah, it's bad. This, you know, again, the old junked cars, obviously all the laundry out there drying, no clothes dryer. You know, of course, that's the church. Wildfires, that's actually a source of income for many Native people. Is in the summer they go work for the Forest Service and make some money fighting fires. And then we've already talked about the Bakken pipeline and water issues. We're pretty involved in the Office of the State Archaeologist couldn't get directly involved, but they were helped me draft a letter from the Department of Human Rights, our Native American Office of Native Americans, to submit a letter to try to get that stopped. We haven't, but there's continuing lawsuits against the Dakota Access Pipeline people, and we'll see. One of the other challenges was that the Indian Health Service hospital at Winnebago, which is where all the people and all the native people in Sioux City and in South Sioux City, which is over in Nebraska, and the Winnebago Tribe, the Omaha, so forth, all go. That's where it's run by the Indian Health Service. And but they were doing such a poor job there that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid basically shut them down. Said, we're not going to provide any more funding for the hospital. Notice there's a little misspelling right there, but so all the Medicaid and Medicare funding was pulled out of there. Well, the tribe stepped in and managed to maintain the emergency room and tried to do the best they could. But just recently here, Danielle Smith, who is a Hawkeye graduate from our law school, and a Winnebago tribal member, is now the director of the 12 Clans Unity Hospital, and the tribe is running it and has an agreement then with the federal government to pay for the health care there. So it's back up and running and doing a lot better job, and just very proud of Danielle for the work that she's managed to accomplish there. Also on Rosebud up in South Dakota, they got closed down for the same reason, but they have still not been able to get back on track. It means that for health care, you have to drive over to Pine Ridge or over to Rapid City. It's 70, 80 mile drive to get health care. It's not good. That's just that hospital. One of the big problems is with the funding for the Indian Health Service. These are plots, the per capita spending per beneficiary for those who are on Medicare, on with national health insurance. If you're a veteran, get a little. So it's per capita spending in the year. Here's Medicaid. Here's the per capita cost for the tribes. But here's the Indian Health Service funding, which is terrible. The federal government just is not meeting its trust obligations to fund health services. And it's just a chronic problem. Yeah, you can read all about it. When we had the shutdown, of course, all the Indian Health Service, which is under the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and that was one of the agencies that completely shut down. And so, okay, who do you think these folks are? Well, of course, you know they're native. What do you think the health problem is here? Obesity. You think there's something else? What's one of the major things associated with obesity? Diabetes. Oh. Now this guy and that guy are brothers, and the drummer and this guy here are both cousins. What else do you notice here? You know, we're talking native people. This, by the way, is a backwards R. It's res, R-E-Z, short for reservation. Res of war. But what else do you see?
I see signs of poor diet.
Yeah,
I just see males.
they're male. What are they doing?
Playing guitars, music.
Yeah. That's a native thing? Well, look at the clothes they're wearing.
Any hip hop artists?
Well, yeah, highest diabetes rate in the world. Yeah, like 60% or more of the tribe is type 2 diabetes by the time they're 40. Well, when this was discovered back in the 70s or early 80s, all the geneticists knew they were going to find the diabetes gene because all these people were related, right? It seemed like. It turned out that the other part of the tribe, this Salt River Pima Maricopas, are people who migrated up from Mexico. The rest of the tribe is down in Mexico. They couldn't be closer genetically related. But what do you see here? That's a wooden shovel. Look at the dress. She's up back in there. That's a little wood burning stove, cook stove. This guy's out working. They don't have diabetes there. Yeah.
I have read that there's much more obesity and probably diabetes among Mexicans than there used to be, because
Once they come to the United States.
no, well, across the border.
Yeah.
Because of sugary drinks that are being pushed.
Yeah.
I think it was specifically sugary drinks.
Yeah. That's a whole nother presentation.
Yeah.
What you might be surprised, it's called the immigrant health paradox. All immigrant populations, including the Mexicans, are healthier when they first come to the United States than are the people in the United States. But after they've been here a couple of generations, it goes down. Well, what's happening? Assimilation? Well, let's look at a couple of things here. Here's where the Pima Maricopas are. I mean, the people down in New Mexico, and here's Tucson, or here's Tucson, here's Phoenix where the picture was, have Anybody ever been out to Phoenix? You know where Scottsdale is? Well, the Pima Maricopa Reservation is right there by Scottsdale. Scottsdale is one of the ritziest communities you're going to find out there. We'll look at that in a minute. But she says that Leslie Schultz, who did a lot of this work, feels that it's due to diet and lack of diet, and poor diet and exercise. I think there's more to it than that. Part of it's environmental. There's Scottsdale. Here's the international airport. The Indian Health Service hospital is right over here. So where's the res? It's the brown. Oh, how did you figure that out? Yeah. So it's here's the Salt River, which has got dammed up, and then goes up here like that. Well, here's where the Mexican Maricopa people, that's what it looks like. That's a little bit greener, a lot greener. So there's some environmental things going on, obviously. But in my view, it's the assimilation and the widely known quotation, kill the Indian, save the man. Here's the kids coming in from Arizona, and then this is only a few weeks or a few months later. They're all in uniform. They're not allowed to speak their language. They're basically indentured servants to the people running the school. But that's kind of the ultimate of assimilation. But as I said about the healthy immigrant paradox, that assimilating to our culture here in the United States is not a healthy thing to do. And what and some of the, especially Asian and other foreign students who are often in my classes, when I really get after it about, don't assimilate and stuff, and don't, say, yes, you have to learn the language and you need to learn the customs here, but you need to preserve as much of your culture and your diet and your family ways that you know, and do that. Don't abandon your language, the way you prepare food, the way the way you deal with things. Don't assimilate. You need to adapt. And this is a whole nother lecture about epigenetics, but it turns out that things like stress, bad experiences, PTSD, can produce changes not in your DNA, not in your genes themselves, but the pattern in which genes are turned off and turned on. Now, you know that every cell in your body has exactly the same genes. Every cell in your body. But your skin cells are different than your brain cells, different from your red blood cells. Well, how is that? Well, different patterns of genes were turned on as you developed. And that, oh, well, yeah, okay. And that's how you end up the way you are. It was generally thought that within 3 or 4 years after you're born, that all stops. It doesn't. Things like stress, trauma, actually even good environments, can turn on patterns of gene expression or turn off gene expression and make it even more those patterns of gene expression. There's no changes in the DNA. It's just whether a given gene is turned on or high, medium, or low. But out of your 23,000 genes, you can have a lot of different patterns of expression. But the real deal is these patterns of gene expression can be inherited by your children and your grandchildren. They can get passed down. That's what epigenetics is. And these articles here, epigenetic inheritance proves what Native Americans have always known. Right. And here's another picture of the Carlisle Indian School. Now, on a more positive note, this is what's going on out there at Pima, Maricopa. They're starting to really develop their land. And this whole program is one that has really sprung up and taken off in a very positive way, called native food sovereignty. As you might expect, most reservation communities are food deserts. There's no place except the truck stop or something to go to get anything to eat. And then it's all crap. But these folks are out there preserving their old seeds and raising their native things, the corn, the bean, the squash, all of those good things. This is one of the First Nations Development Institute is one of the major funders for the native food sovereignty thing. And this is what the Meskwaki have been doing. They now have 40 acres and they can supply each family with a box of currently good, with what's in season for every family that wants one. They can also supply the cafeteria, the school cafeteria, with all of their fruits and vegetables. And they can go to the farmers markets and make money, called Red Earth Gardens. And I don't know if this hyperlink will work, but that's what and this is all organically certified stuff. That's why it's real popular at the farmers markets. And they're expanding it. They're growing nut trees. They do maple syrup. 2 years ago, they even had enough syrup, real good year. They boiled it all down to, or a lot of it down to maple sugar. That was the only sweet that native people knew of, was maple syrup. But that kind of concludes things. If anybody got any comments or questions or anything? Well, I thank you, and